Welcome. Today, we're on live and kicking on Serenity FM or serenity.co.uk. So I'm very, very excited today. Sorry, my name is Jason Cooper. I didn't actually say that. I should always actually mention my name first. But today I'm very excited. A good friend of mine, a fellow coach, fellow mind coach, Elfreda. And she's from Metta-morphics, and she is an expert, a mindfulness teacher, but she's been teaching mindfulness for, I'm sure she's going to give you a better explanation than myself, for a number of years, but she's only missed a couple of days in actually doing mindfulness herself or meditation herself. So she's very good in those areas, but she's also recently studied for a master's in positive psychology, and I know she's going to be mentioning a little bit more of that. And she's also been teaching confidence to teachers in higher education, so we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. So Elfreda, without further ado, please introduce yourself and give a little bit more an enhanced introduction than what I've done about yourself, if you could.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me here this morning. As you said, I'm Elfreda Manahan-Vaughan, and I've been working in the area of personal development for well over 23 years or thereabouts. My background was in drama and communication, and I set up my own business when I was 22. So I worked with children and teenagers and adults teaching performance skills, and eventually moved more into the area of confidence and helping people develop their confidence in public speaking and communication. I then retrained, and I trained as a coach. So I started out with a level 5 coaching course, and then I moved into training in NLP, and I did a practitioner and a master practitioner and set up a coaching business. And during that time, then I also started to meditate. So I've been meditating or practicing mindfulness, really, I suppose, for a decade. I'd always been using aspects of meditation. So as a drama teacher, you do a lot of relaxation exercises. So I'd been teaching some of those things, for years, but actually having a formal practice was something I hadn't got myself. And so I started practicing about a decade ago. And then 7 years ago, I made the commitment to continue without a break in my own practice. And so I've only missed 2 days in 7 years, and I've over 3,000 hours of meditation under my belt at this stage. So I started teaching 5 years ago, well, almost 6 years ago now. And so I've been teaching to adults. I work with lots of different groups. So I work obviously privately as a coach. And then I have I work with 2 education and training boards in Ireland. And so they're education organizations who work in further education and training. And so I teach adults, particularly mindfulness, but also personal development, public speaking, effective communication, different aspects of confidence courses, stress management, positive psychology, which I've now incorporated. And I also teach in a third level or further education and training college as well. I teach coaching there. So they have a nutritional lifestyle coaching program, and I teach the lifestyle coaching there as well. So lots of different things. They call it a portfolio career, I believe. I heard that word quite recently. And so it's a mixture of everything.
Wow, that's incredible, and that's I'm absolutely blown away by all of that. It seems like a ton of stuff. Could you tell me a little bit more about positive psychology? Because I'm really intrigued by that, and the listeners will also be intrigued. And your little journey quite recently of studying a master's.
Yeah, so I've just finished my postgraduate diploma in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology, and I'll be going on to finish my master's. And by this time next year, I'll be finished, all going to plan. Wow. So positive psychology is really only been around since 1998. So back in 1998, Martin Seligman, who's considered the father of positive psychology, took over as president of the American Psychological Association, or the APA. Those of you who've ever heard of APA citations will have heard of it. And he decided that they should change their direction. For years, they were covering what's called psychology as usual. And so that's really been around since the First World War, that they started to focus on that. Before that, the psychology in general and the focus of the APA and different organizations was into the success or greatness of geniuses, into well-being, and then into ameliorating illness or mental illness. But after the First World War, when there was a lot of what was shell shock, which we now know as PTSD, they changed direction. And so it became all about ameliorating mental illness, and the other stuff kind of got a bit forgotten. I mean, it was there in humanistic, psychology. So people like Maslow and people like that would have been, researching that, but not in the mainstream. And so back in 1988, Martin Seligman said, no, we need to change direction. And so the focus of the APA was what is now positive psychology, which is really about making life better. And so the research is into well-being, particularly subjective well-being. It's also looking at things like flourishing, and looking more recently, because we're now heading into a third wave of positive psychology. But the second wave of positive psychology was really about looking at the dark side of positive psychology, which is embracing your negative emotions and not trying to get rid of them. It shouldn't be about being all happy all the time. It's about being normal and being rounded. And also then it looked at organizations and how we can, look at systems and how positive psychology impacts that. Because a lot of, in the West particularly, a lot of areas of psychology, and particularly the self-help or the popular psychology industry, is very much about individuals taking responsibility for their well-being. But that denies the fact that we function in systems. And so positive psychology now looks more about the fact that, an organization, and I'm not just talking in business, I'm talking about, family, you're talking about the community, that all of these things have a contributing factor to our well-being. So the whole area, touches on many things. So it touches on well-being, it touches on flow experiences, it looks at areas of wisdom, gratitude. There's so much appreciative inquiry. There's huge amounts of areas that positive psychology looks at. But it really is about making life better. How do we make life better for ourselves as individuals, and how do we make life better for us as collective beings, as part of groups?
Wow, that's incredible. It's something that I would love to get involved with. I've looked at it, but I'd love to get on that study of that positive psychology, because it just fascinates me. I've just done a psychology course. Well, I'm halfway through it, but that area is also a fascination. So how would you go about coaching someone in positive psychology, but also implementing that within a business as well? How would you do that? There's a double-barrel question there, but I'm intrigued on a coaching level, because I like to coach people on sales and in business and that type of area. But I'm also interested in how you develop someone like myself on positive psychology, because I know you're doing lots of coaching at the moment in that area. So, and I saw a post on LinkedIn. If any of the listeners would like to get involved, Elfreda is offering coaching to obviously up her game and get some more experience in this area. So that's the question for you. How would you coach me, and also how would you do that in organizations?
So when working with individuals, a lot of positive psychology coaches, and myself included, focus on the area of strengths. So there's particular research into strengths in positive psychology, and there's a particular a test called the VIA Character. You find it on the viacharacter.org website, and it has 24 different strengths that they've discovered across, all sorts of different groups and across different countries. And so these strengths are common to most people. And so we have ones that we use really, really well, and then we have ones that we underutilize, and we can overutilize them as well. So a lot of coaches in positive psychology will focus on the area of strengths. And so you might do strength coaching, where you help a coachee or a client to identify their strengths, to then help work with those strengths so that they can improve in different areas of life. In NLP, we often talk about modeling, and so you might model your own strengths. But it's a huge area for a lot of positive psychology coaches. Now, some will be more moving into the positive psychology practitioner realm, and that's where they use specific interventions. And so a positive psychology intervention is an empirically tested intervention. So it's one that's got science behind it, that they've researched. And you might then, based on your discussions with a coachee or a client, realize that these things might be relevant to them. So you could use a particular intervention. It might be a gratitude intervention.
Okay.
It might be an intervention on flow. It might be an intervention on happiness. You can also use scales and questionnaires to help people measure where they're at. So you might use a scale to measure what level their happiness at as the beginning, and then for them to do an intervention, and then for them to assess themselves at the end. Now, for me personally, I don't specifically use scales. I do in my courses when I'm teaching, and I do use interventions when I'm teaching. When I'm working with clients, a lot of it is more about the kind of the holistic element of how can they make their life better? What is it that they need to work on, improve? And so I would be positive psychology informed in that. And also I specifically work in areas where I use trauma informed coaching. So I work with people who are maybe on the journey towards post-traumatic growth, which is a huge area. And this is the area I'm focusing on my own dissertation. And so post-traumatic growth is something that a lot of coaches who are positive psychology coaches would work in. As regards organizations, then with an organization, there's a brilliant model called the LIFE model, and it's been created by Dr. Tim Lomas and Kate Heffron and Itai Itzvan, who would all be positive psychologists. And the LIFE model looks at 4 areas of somebody's life. So it looks at them from their mind area, their body area, their culture, as in the groups that they associate with, and society. And so when you work with an organization, you look at an organization, look at the individuals, what they need maybe physically, you look at then what they need culturally within that organization, and what do they need, within the system of that organization. So it's called multidimensional flourishing in organizations is usually what they call it. And so you would implement then programs or things that might impact that. So for example, it might be that they engage in a particular thing called job crafting, and job crafting would be an exercise where people identify their strengths within their job and how they can capitalize on that, so that maybe if somebody's been given a task that they're not their best at, and somebody else loves doing that task within a company, you can identify who does these things the best and change the way people work. You might then look at, physical things. So that might be introducing yoga class or something that, or a walking group. And then you look at the cultural things. So what kind of social things might be there for people to connect, for people to open up to, to have conversations. And then you might look also again at the environment. Does the lighting need to change? Do they need more plants? Do you need to reorganize the layout of the desks? And then you look at, obviously, from the the system side of things. Are there things that need to be changed from a management perspective? Top-down stuff that might influence the well-being of the clients. And so it's the organization and the staff. And so you're really looking at what will make life better for the staff, but when it's an organization, what will make the organization function better as well. So it's quite, again, a holistic approach, but the LIFE model is a really, really useful one for doing that, because it has these 4 quadrants that you can look at, and you can obviously use it for yourself as well to identify, where you are. And a lot of it comes from the work of Ken Wilber. And his, there's different levels within this model, and so it's based on some historical work as well.
I've seen it in practice in the likes of Google, LinkedIn, and as I recently saw, TikTok is trying to get a person like that within their organization that can have a look at the complete holistic point of view and the well-being of their staff. And I think that's absolutely awesome. And I know when I've been working in startups at the Guinness Enterprise Center and other startups, and I've coached some businesses in there, and I just said, the walls, they're just white. That's not really good, conducive to the brain. You need to get some plants in here. You need to start to do something with the lighting in here. The lighting in here is one of those big, long strip lights, which is sort of gives you a headache after a while if you're sitting in there. And even the view wasn't that great either. So what they did afterwards, they went to IKEA and they just bought loads and loads of plants, and there's lots and lots of plants in there, which is wonderful. And it is good to see green spaces. I know there's a lot of research out there on even the view, having some sort of green area to look at outside of your window. So even if you have a sea view, or you can see plants, or you can see woods or whatever. I know outside my window, I can see a housing estate, but I can see some plants and all that. And it's just good, very conducive to the brain. But there's also research that also states that living near water, something is really good for the body and the mind and everything like that, because majority of our body is water based. So when you're near water, there's some sort of interaction there, something with the body that reacts in a really good spiritual way. Something that you mentioned is flourishing, and I wrote the word down. Can you expand on that? What do you mean by flourishing? How does that work?
So if you think of our mental health, so there's something called a mental health continuum. So if you're talking from minus 10 to plus 10. So 0 is where most people are at, and that's considered mentally functioning. And if we have mental illness, so if we've got something that will be in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of mental illness, you'd be somewhere down the minus 10, minus 9, minus 8, minus 7. And then we have a space called languishing, which is people who are neither mentally ill or mentally functioning, which means they're in this kind of in-between state. Most people fall into mentally functioning, about 65% of the population or thereabouts, I think, in more recent assessments. And then you go into the plus areas. And so the plus areas and up to plus 10 would be considered moving into what's called thriving or flourishing. And so when we're considered thriving or flourishing, and there's ways to measure this, there you can Google, a flourishing scale.
I'm going to do that now, actually.
And you can test it. And so when you assess for that, you're looking at whether people have life satisfaction. Are they very happy with their life? Are they thriving in their relationships? Are they thriving in their work environment? Are they thriving in their physical health? And so the more somebody meets the criteria for thriving, the further up the scale they move, so that you can end up where you're at a plus 10. And so that's somebody who's doing really well. Now, it doesn't mean that you won't necessarily have periods of mental ill health. You can do. People can have PTSD and be thriving. You can also not necessarily have the best job, but it's a feeling that people have, an experience that they have, where they feel like everything is the way it's meant to be. But they have great coping mechanisms, so they're able to handle negative emotions. They're okay with things not working out. So there's a high level of, I suppose, autonomy in it, and a feeling of being in charge in your life. I don't like to use the word control because sometimes that has negative connotations, but being in charge in your life, where you feel that you're moving towards your goals and you're feeling successes in your life, and life is good, which is ultimately what we want. And so that's where people are when they're thriving or flourishing. And a huge amount of positive psychology is about helping people get to that point where they consider themselves thriving or flourishing.
So how do you know that? How would you know that you're in that flourishing state and you feel like you're moving forward? You said there's a flourishing test.
Yes, you can do a flourishing scale. So, you can just Google it. I mean, it's a scale. So it's a positive psychology scale. It's been empirically tested. So, but you can Google, if you Google the flourishing scale, you'll find it. And then you can measure where you are in relation to your flourishing. But the kind of questions are that you feel your life is exactly as it meant to be, or you look back on your life and you think it's exactly how you would have wanted it to be. And the questions are kind of like that. But in general, it's where, I suppose for me, it's where you feel that life ticks all the boxes. You get up and you feel energized. You feel, I love my job. I'm happy in my relationship if you have one. I've got great friendships. I love the way my life functions. I love where I live. I like how I live my life. And they would be the kind of things that you'd be looking at. And if you feel that, life is awesome, and I'm really happy, and I think it's great, and that when you hit a blip, you can handle it. So, resilience is a huge area of research in positive psychology as well, but that you can handle when you hit the blips or when stuff goes wrong, and that you're not looking for it to be perfect. It's not a kind of a happy clappy, everything is wonderful all the time, deluded thing. It's genuinely just thinking, no, this is great. And I'm really happy that you've more of the good than you might have the bad, or you just don't even see it as bad. You just say, well, it's just stuff that's happening, and everything is on track for me. And if you're working towards goals and you're achieving the things you want to achieve in your life, then you may find that you are very high up in the flourishing. Now, the research says it's very low. Only about 17% of the population will be classed as flourishing, which is why positive psychology is such a huge thing these days, to try and help people to improve their well-being. Because most people are in that functioning area where it's okay, but it's not great, or it's not awesome, or they're not bouncing out of their bed in the morning. They're getting by, but they're not depressed, and they're not suffering with mental illness, and they're good coping mechanisms. But the thriving is really pushing beyond that, where you're really feeling, gosh, this is fantastic. This is exactly how I'd like to be living my life.
So who would you think is thriving in, if you could think of a person or someone in the media, who do you perceive to be thriving, from perception wise anyway?
I wouldn't even try to do that, because it's subjective. Well-being is subjective. So so like if I was to try and pick, I don't know what's going on in their personal life. I don't know what's going on in their private life. Only you will know if you're thriving. You can't pinpoint and say that, because it's your criteria. So you're looking at your life. So like, you could look back and you could have a very difficult life, but still be thriving now, because for you, the criteria is different, while somebody else could have similar experiences to you and think they don't have a great life. And so it's, well-being is subjective. It's measured by the individual. So, and thriving is the same. So you could have two people. You could have somebody who lives a very, meager kind of existence, lives in a small, apartment maybe, and, doesn't have beautiful views, has a job that they enjoy, and they might come out as thriving. Whilst we might, if we were to look at from the outside, say, oh, well, if you were living in a house, or if you were living in the countryside, if you've got a well-paid job, or you're very successful, based on our criteria, we might say, well, that's what thriving is, and deny the fact that that person is actually experiencing thriving themselves. So, you will only know yourself whether you're thriving when you actually go to measure it. And most people who are thriving know they're thriving. They know that they're feeling incredible. They know that their life is going really, really well. And if they're not, they're usually seeking. So they're looking for something, looking for a solution, looking for something to make things better. They're, it's a different experience, if you're not, but you're doing okay. And that's where a lot of people come for coaching. Certainly for me, a lot of people come for coaching because they say, this isn't quite it. It's not quite good enough yet. And, I want to figure out how to get it there. And so they will often come to me for coaching to say, I know my life could be better. How do I get there? And that's, that's usually where somebody's, facing in the right direction, I suppose, where they're looking for that experience of thriving.
That's really interesting. I know for me, probably about 8 years ago, I just thought that there wasn't something quite right in my life. The job wasn't going that well. I got made redundant a couple of times in the row, and I don't know, it just didn't feel comfortable inside of me. So that's where I went out and researched things that I wish I had a coach at that particular time to help me through those challenging times, because I knew something wasn't quite right. And I just looked everywhere for, so what can I do? I wish I had a mentor. I'm looking for a mentor now. I've been coached probably a million times now, but which is good because it challenges me, and it challenges me in a positive way to actually help me move forward and get me out of that procrastination area, because I think a lot of people suffer from that. And I know for me, neuro-linguistic programming helped me, and it sort of fascinated me as well, because I like the study of the mind. I like how the body operates, and I love those sort of areas, and your state management. What got you into NLP in the first place?
Well, I suppose that it's often the way for a lot of people is that I came across Paul McKenna, who mentioned it, and it had crossed my wavelength a few times. And then I read some of Paul McKenna's books. I remember I read I Can Make You Sane many years ago, and I was quite intrigued by it. And then I read one of Joseph O'Connor's one, and then I read NLP for Dummies. And I got really interested in it. And, that's, that must be 13 years ago or more when I started to come across it. And I had just started I'd gone back into education. I was doing a degree in Literature and Sociology. And I decided that when I'd finish, I was going to find out where I could, train in NLP, where I could research it. And so when I finished, the first thing I did was I did a coaching course. And then I discovered the Irish Institute of NLP in Ireland, and I started my training with them. And that was back in 2012, the year after I finished my degree. I went straight into training in NLP. But it was Paul McKenna and his books and, you know, his conversations on the television that first twigged back in about 2007 when I first kind of came across it and started to read up about it.
It's fascinating. I remember hearing about it. I went to Tony Robbins in London twice, actually. I went the first time and he spoke about NLP, and the stuff that he was doing was absolutely fascinating. And I just went, wow, this is incredible. This is 2003. And then I went back in 2004 and I paid for one of my friends to go as well, because I thought he would enjoy it. He didn't actually enjoy it as much as I did. And I just thought it was incredible. And after that, I started to get a lot of books, but I didn't really. I think it's one of those things that you have to actually do. For me, I have to actually do before I can learn. I'm quite a visual orientated person. I have to really immerse myself in it. And that's when I sort of looked around and tried to find the best person. And ironically enough, I was co-founded a startup that was literally 2 minutes around the corner from the Irish Institute of NLP, where they actually have their head office. And I remember ringing up Brian Colbert and saying, would you like to come in and doing a sales training course for these guys in NLP? And we had several conversations, and it didn't actually come about in the end. But it was literally about a year or so later that I went, right, I'm going to throw some money at this and learn. Then I got addicted to it. Well, I'm not addicted to it because I really like the idea behind it. I like the idea of the language, the influence, the persuasion, and the meta model, and all of these other tools. But it's actually utilizing them, which I found out later, in an organic way, in a conversational way, as opposed to I'm going to be doing this technique now, I'm going to be doing this technique, because that doesn't really work and people know it. So you have to really come from a point of being authentic, a point of being just natural. And if you are coaching people, it's just like you're going to the next thing, and it's like there's a natural way about it. How do you find it when you're coaching? I know you do work in different areas on that. How would you slot in maybe positive psychology, or maybe you're going to be slotting in other areas? Do you slot in other things when you're coaching, or how do you work?
So yeah, I suppose I the way I work is that the person comes in front of me and I basically work with them. And so if I'm working with them and I realize that they're coming and their question is more existential than practical or goal orientated, then I'll work with an existential framework. If I realize that they're coming with something that is more narrative based about themselves, I might use narrative coaching, and then I might incorporate NLP. So when I'm working, it's very organic. So it really depends on who's in front of me. And I'm not kind of going, oh, I'll use this or I'll use that. Certainly NLP informs all my coaching in that, I can't not use the NLP language, because once you've been trained in it, and I've done several trainings, it becomes natural to the way you communicate. So I would use a lot of what's called the Milton model, which is based on the hypnotic language, through most of my coaching in conversational coaching. And sometimes consciously I will say, okay, I'm going to use particular words or whatever to influence in a positive way. If I've elicited from somebody a solution to a problem they may be presenting with, then I may hand that back in NLP language to help them, so that they can then, make better decisions, or that they can incorporate whatever the changes into their life. But for me, it's really about, it's all of this stuff is just in the background, and it depends on what the person wants or needs. And so as long as I'm working in a coaching framework, which is very different from therapy, then, I will use whatever is necessary in the moment, or whatever I feel will be useful. And that will be driven by the coachee or the client. They will tell me basically what they need. And then I will go, here's my set of tools, and what will I bring to this in the moment, and there's so many ways that you can do it. I certainly, I've been coached by people who use a lot of, objects and things in their coaching. And, it's something I've started to incorporate. So there's so many ways that you can use stuff, including NLP, but NLP can be there in the background of everything, because it's language based. That, it's very difficult, certainly if you're trained in NLP and you've been immersed in it through your training, it's very difficult to stop using the language. You naturally will use it anyway.
Yeah. It does take a lot of practice, and you have to keep on looking back at it, I know for myself, and we all go to skills evenings and do that to get ourselves back on track. But it's one of those things that when you first learn it, it's not natural, but then you have to practice it and then practice it and practice it and practice it and keep. It's like being a doctor, really, I find, is you have to keep going back and going upgrading your skill sets and going, wow, yeah, I forgot about that. I have to keep on using that. Or the language language patterns. I think it's quite hypnotic. And within, I can imagine mindfulness and meditation when you can put people into a sort of a relaxed state. You can use the sort of hypnotic language to get people into a good breathing set and also into a nice relaxed state. And that's something that I'd like to speak to you about in a few seconds. I'm just going to pause now for just a quick commercial break. And welcome back. I'm absolutely very excited today. Elfreda is obviously an expert in her area and in her field, and she's got a huge amount of research, and she's studied so much, and she's thousands of hours of teaching, thousands of hours of coaching, and thousands of hours of looking in at herself on meditation and studying how she can work to be better and better serve, because it is about serving others for them to be better themselves. For myself, I like to upgrade my skills at all times and read books and podcasts and online study. So if I'm half as good as Elfreda, I'll be getting there, and I'll be really happy with that. So another area that we're going to be discussing now is meditation or mindfulness. What's the difference between the two from your point of view? And also, what area do you study in the vertical of mindfulness or meditation that you're in? So 3 questions there. I hope you can answer all 3 of them.
I'll do my best. So I suppose meditation, is a general term. I mean, the term meditation means to become familiar with, so it's a general term, and it covers a huge area. So you can have meditation that's, to do with Reiki. You can have meditation that comes from Hindu practices. You can have, guided visualizations that would be labeled as meditation. You can have then obviously mindfulness meditation. And so mindfulness comes from, particular schools of Buddhist practices, and although it's a secular practice now, in that it's not a religious based thing in the way we explore it, excuse me, in the West, its origins is in Buddhist practices. So it comes through Theravada practices, and there's aspects of it in Zen practices as well. And so mindfulness has a huge amount of research behind it, whilst some of the other ones doesn't necessarily. I know Transcendental Meditation has research behind it, except it's researched solely by the Transcendental Meditation International Organization, whilst mindfulness is studied by lots of different people. And so mindfulness is really about becoming familiar with yourself. So it's an exploration of self-awareness. Now, there are byproducts in it, in that it will make you relaxed, but it also, from the research, tells us that it actually physically changes the brain. So it actually has an impact on your brain. Now, some of the other practices may do that, but there isn't necessarily research behind them. And some of the practices will be more spiritual, whilst mindfulness, as we learn it in the West, isn't necessarily spiritual, although people can use it in a spiritual way. For me, I've trained in mindfulness in the kind of Western version. So I've done an MBSR, and I've done all those kind of things. That's the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. But my main teacher, so I did training with a Zen Buddhist monk. So I've done some of the Zen teachings, and I've also then trained in the Burmese method, or the new Burmese method, which is slightly different. And I've also done training in the Theravada Buddhist avenue into mindfulness. So I've dipped in them all, and I've also done, Reiki, and I've also done, meditation training with Dr. Joe Dispenza. And so I've done lots of different ones, but the one that I would mainly focus on would, I suppose, come from the new Burmese method, which is really about opening up to the present moment and accepting everything as it is. So, often they talk about in mindfulness and in Buddhism, they talk about the eightfold path, which has, right mindfulness, should I say, it has right action, right, thinking, all of those things. Whilst the new Burmese method says, well, there isn't a right or a wrong way, there just is. And so, those meditations are often meditations where you might label your experience so that you can become more conscious of yourself as the context in where things arise, as opposed to you being part of it. So you can say, this is I'm not my thoughts are occurring in me. I'm not my body. I'm experiencing my body in the moment. And so I find that really useful. Certainly for myself, that would be the main practice I would engage in. And the reason being is that, for me, my life experience brought an awful lot of difficult events. And so being able to look back at those and say, they're just experiences, and everybody gets experiences, and they're neither good nor bad, they're just events that occurred in my life, was incredibly useful for me in my practice, to be able to sort of detach from those things. So that I was neither trying to, fix them as something that was wrong, or trying to make them seem better. I was just going, no, but they are just what they are. And so that would be, I suppose, my main approach, although I teach all of the general practices when I'm teaching, obviously in my courses, whether that's online or face-to-face, I would teach all of the different types, and I incorporate bits of, the Theravada mindfulness and the Zen mindfulness. And, because obviously I think a more rounded experience of it is better for somebody, and it helps them decide, what's right for them. And your intention is very important. If you're coming just to learn to relax, well, then that's a very different intention for somebody who's coming to become self-aware. And there are things to consider when you're, developing a meditation or a mindfulness practice as well.
I've done several mindfulness, but what about the chakras? When is there 5 different chakras, or is there more?
7. Well, there's 7 that we label, but there's nearly 120 something in total. But the ones we think about, and are discussed more normally are 7. Now that wouldn't be part of mindfulness at all. They're much more from the Hindu practices. So that's different. You don't do chakra real practices in mindfulness, and I in general, I don't think they do them in Buddhist practices, but I could be wrong on that. I haven't come across it, but it's often more of the Hindu practices where the chakras really come in, and they're the ones the 7 are the ones we most notably know about, but seemingly there's 120 something, I think, or possibly even more than that.
Oh, really? So what is the chakra? Describe what the chakra actually means.
I mean, I suppose my knowledge is limited enough in that as far as I would consider it, I use sort of Dr. Joe Dispenza's description, which is that they're energy centers, and so they're linked to sort of glands in the body. So you have obviously different areas. You've got your pituitary gland, and you've got the pineal gland, and you've got the thymus, and you've got your gonads, and you've got obviously the different areas. And so more recent research says they're linked to the energy centers are linked to glands, but they would be considered centers of energy, and people would label them depending on where they are in the body, so your root chakra is the one at the base of your spine, and that would be related to being more grounded. Then you might have your one at your solar plexus, which is often considered to do with your confidence. The one at your heart would be considered to do with love and heart, and so each one would have different associations that people would often use to them. But again, that's not my area, because that's not mindfulness. So my knowledge is only based on my own learning through the people who I've been taught by.
It's a quite fascinating area now. I've read all Dr. Joe Dispenza's books, and I had to reread them again because they're quite technical. I think one of them is ridiculously technical, and he goes through all the areas of the brain and studies that. So I had to listen to that again, and I probably need a third read of it to really understand it. And all of that area regarding neuroplasticity is reconnecting the neurons together. If they what's the saying that he says? If they wire, they fire together. I think
fire. Yeah. So they fire together, wire together.
So that's one of his big sayings.
Yeah. And basically it's about, being a habitual being. So, he says by the time we get to the age of 35, everything we do, or most 90% of what we do, is habit. So we get up at the same time, we wear the same kind of clothes, we eat the same kind of food, we go to the same kind of places, we talk to the same kind of people. And that impacts how we function in the world. It impacts our memory, certainly from neuroplasticity. They know the more habits we have, the more we're going to forget, because we're not using those neural pathways in the brain. And so if we do new things, or learn new things, or even try simple things like, walking up the stairs backwards, or eating with the opposite hand, that stimulates making new connections. And that's the cells that fire together, wire together. But the more habits we have, the more we forget, and the more we get ingrained into who we are, and our personality, and our sense of identity, and all of those things. And that being able to expand beyond that can create great opportunity for you.
I think I absolutely agree. And it also stimulates you as well. It stimulates you in a better way. You feel like you've actually achieved something once you get different connections in there. But habits, as we know, does take a little bit of work, a lot of persistence, and to do something slightly different than what you're normally used to doing. So especially within business, and I've been to organizations and they're just stuck in a rut. They're stuck in a rut because they're not changing. They're not expanding the ideas of what they've actually had. So I go in there and do some brainstorming ideas and say, well, this is a different path that you need to test and need to have a look at. It's slightly different to what you're normally used to. And that's probably retraining their brains to do something slightly different and getting them outside of their comfort zone to be a little bit more uncomfortable. So something that I'm also fascinated, and we discussed before we went on the air, is that you're gifted and you've learnt, I suppose I would say gifted, but you've learnt to have a gift by all the study and research that you've done. So you've got some extra knowledge that not other people have. So a little bit of a gift back to all the listeners that are listening right now is, I'm putting you on the spot here. Would you be able to do a couple of minutes meditation of an area that you specialize in? I know, Elfreda, you run workshops as well in County Meath, where you live, and I know they're well attended, and you've done some phenomenal work in there. And I know that you have, because I've read a lot of your testimonials, which is awesome. But putting you on the spot now, would you be inclined to give in a couple of minutes meditation, and then we will finish up as a gift back to all of our listeners?
Well, I suppose the simplest one to do, which is one that anybody can do and do at any stage, is really, it's a kind of almost a grounding thing, but it's a self-awareness thing, which is a very simple one that I teach. And I teach it in most of my classes, not just in my mindfulness classes, which is called the here and now. And so basically all you need to do is you're going to close your eyes.
Okay.
And when you close your eyes, you're going to bring awareness to what's happening to you right now. So I'll do it first so you'll understand, and then we'll give everybody a couple of minutes to do it themselves. Now, the important bit with this is that you voice this. So this is unusual when it comes to meditation. Normally we're sitting in silence, but for this one, you voice it. And so that's that you have the reinforcement of hearing it, and that you're bringing yourself into awareness of what's going on. So as you sit with your eyes closed, you bring awareness to what you notice. So for me, the first thing I noticed was my feet on the floor. And so I can actually feel my socks on my feet, because it's cool today in Ireland, so I have socks on. I can feel that there is a cable under one of my toes, because there's a cable on the floor beneath me. I'm now conscious of my hands on my knees, and I'm aware of my lower back, because I've had a little bit of discomfort in it lately. I've become aware of my breath now, and the rhythm of my breath as I breathe in and breathe out. Because I have my eyes open, I've noticed in my peripheral vision the trees outside and a bird flying past. And if I check in with my emotional state now that I'm checking in with my physical state, I feel quite calm. I feel quite relaxed. I'm also noticing my mental state is focused, because I'm focused on what I'm doing. So I'm going to stay quiet now, and I'm going to let everybody do this. So obviously you're at home, so you can speak out loud. Jason, it's up to you whether you want to voice it yourself. But this is about becoming aware of your present moment. What's in your conscious awareness? And you can do this eyes open or eyes closed, whichever you prefer. If you do it eyes closed, it'll bring you more into your own internal awareness. If you do it eyes open, it'll bring you more into your external awareness. And obviously you can include sounds and things as well. I wasn't conscious of any particular sound, but you can bring your awareness into sounds as well. So I'm going to stay quiet just for a few minutes, and you only 2 or 3 minutes, and you can just do this yourselves.
Mm-hmm. It's actually really good to focus in on the feet that are grounded on the floor and your knees.
Okay, so we've 2 minutes past now. If you want to bring yourself back into awareness, I find that a really useful one, especially if you're in a place where you're feeling that sense of being discombobulated, or you're just not, you're feeling a bit off, because it can often give you an insight into what's going on with you internally. So I know often I've done that, and I might realize that I'm somewhere and I'm feeling, a little bit awkward. And then I realize that maybe I'm feeling a little uncertain, or I'm not sure of what I need to do. And so by going in and just checking, and you can just do it with your eyes open as well, it's a really useful way of bringing yourself into that self-awareness. And for me, certainly mindfulness is that avenue into yourself. The more you become aware of yourself, the more control you have, or the more capacity to choose. And for me, it's about learning to live consciously and to choose consciously, rather than coming from your old habitual patterns from your past that you're not even aware of, but to actually go, oh, this is why this is happening, because this is what I'm feeling. Now I get to choose how I want to be, rather than, reacting to people. You get to respond. And I find that's a really nice little short one to do at any stage to help you to do that.
That's awesome. I really like that. That's hugely powerful. I know something that I do, and I was taught to do before going to meetings or before I have a call like this, is to close my eyes, do the breathe-in technique, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, and breathe in for 4. You do that. Then you do the body scan, and then you bring in some powerful white light through your body. But through the third eye, you send a ray of light out to that person that you're just about to have a meeting with, and all positive intention as you go through, and you broadcast this light to those people. And there's several other things that I've done. Is I was taught to build a lighthouse in your mind, and as you build the lighthouse in your mind, it's almost like when you enter the lighthouse, there's a lift that goes up into the top. But as you enter the lift, it's almost like going up into your spine until you go up into where the light actually is. And then you actually sit into the light, and then you project into the area of the world that you want to project this positive intention to that particular person. And then you say in your mind, this is going to go well, or whatever it might be. And you push that light towards that person, and then you get that positive intention. And then you come out 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, or however long that you want to do it. And the meeting tends to go really well, or the conversations go really well. And it's hugely powerful stuff to do. So that's something that I've done before. And I find that really good, and especially if I'm going into a corporate meeting or I'm sitting in reception, I just disappear to the gents and close my eyes for 10 minutes and do that, and then come out again, and I feel quite good. The receptionist probably feels, where's he going? He's gone for 10 minutes, but really just sitting there, closing my eyes and just mainly relaxing before I go in there and have a really good positive intention. So Elfreda, how can people find you? And tell me a bit about your website and how people connect with you.
So, well, if you Google me, Elfreda Manahan-Vaughan, or my website, www.metamorphics.com, you'll find me. I'm also on all social media. So you'll find me on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. You know, so you'll find me across the board.
Your name, because a lot of the UK audience, because you're the only person I've come across with that is called Elfreda. So because I don't know anyone else that's called Elfreda. So
Elfreda is Elfreda, and it's Manahan-Vaughan is my surname. But yeah, you'll find me on all the channels on social media. You know, if you want to work with me, I work via Zoom and also face-to-face. My classes currently, they're online, and eventually I'll be back face-to-face as well. Especially the ones in further education and training will move back face-to-face probably in the coming months. But at the moment, everything is online. And so it's very easy to connect with me. You can pop me an email or a message, or you can connect with me on social media. I'll happily answer any questions you might have.
Awesome. That is absolutely incredible. Look, I really thank you from the bottom of my heart. This has been absolutely awesome. You've covered so much within the last 50 minutes, and I know people are going to get a huge amount out of this. And I'll add in your details as well. Metamorphics.com, is that correct?
.com, yes, yeah.
Okay,
thanks, Jason.
fantastic.
Thanks very much.
Have a great day.
You too.